Hey there, I'm Mr. Bo, and today I'm going to be reviewing Biomutant, the brand new game from Experiment 101. It is an action RPG open world game, and it is releasing on PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, Xbox One, Xbox Series X and S, as well as PC. Now, all the footage you're going to be seeing in this video is from early on in the game, so you don't need to worry about spoilers. All of the stuff you'll be seeing is within the first few hours of the game. So I'll be honest. Going into Biomutant, I really didn't know what Biomutant was. I'd seen a few trailers and I'd quickly looked at a bit of gameplay a couple of months ago, but apart from that, it wasn't really on my radar, which is surprising because I love games like this. Open world RPGs with a ton of exploration and a ton of customization, and basically allows you to play the way that you want to play. Now, I really like Biomutant, but that isn't to say it doesn't have some weaknesses to it. So let's talk about the story of this game. The gist of it is you are this mutated cat-rat thing. Tons of corporations used to dump their toxics into the water, which created this bio world that we're living in. You, as a young cat-rat thing, saw your mother get killed and your father get killed by this creature called Lupin, and it basically results in you trying to avenge your mum and your dad, trying to restore the tree of life, which is dying due to these toxics and these creatures called world eaters, and you finding people to join you on the Ark, which is a ship where you're going to basically leave the world. Now, as you're playing through this game, you can pick to either be light or dark. Now, apparently this has an effect on the end of the game, and I went a full light playthrough, and I don't really know what that changed, so I'd be interested to go back, play a full dark playthrough, and see just how that affects the end of the game. With that being said though, I didn't feel engaged in this story at all. Now, all the characters you speak to have crazy names like Gloop and Glob and Whiz and things like that, and this game does an unusual choice of having a narrator. When you're speaking to characters, they're all talking in their own language, and the narrator is basically transcribing what they are saying. And unfortunately, it makes this game feel like a children's TV show. The narrator who they used, and all these different weird names, reminded me of a program called In the Night Garden. Now, I don't know if that was the tone they were going for with this game, but it didn't really make me feel engaged, and I ended up just kind of skipping and skimming through most of the dialogue with these characters. You do get to have different dialogue choices where you pick, and that then affects the light and the dark, and you even have ability of persuading characters. If you go up to some outposts and you find their leader, instead of fighting them, you can just persuade them to surrender, which is a neat addition. So I think that is my biggest negative when it comes to Biomutant, is just that the story isn't engaging. But I will say that doesn't matter in terms of enjoying this game, because the gameplay makes up for it tenfold. Now, I'd seen a lot of people comparing this game to something like Breath of the Wild, and I've never played Breath of the Wild, but I did feel like this game was almost a mixture of Immortals Phoenix Rising and a game, say, like Ghost of Tsushima, your classic open world RPG game. There is a ton of choice in this game in terms of how you want to play. When it comes to creating your character, you have a few different options. Picking your breed, which basically affects your stats, and mutating that breed, which again affects your stats even further. But what I will say is I felt like that didn't actually matter at all, because as you're playing through the game, you're leveling up and you're earning points that you can then put into your stats. So if you decided to make your character at the beginning full agility, but then you're playing through and you realize that you want a ton of strength for your melee weapon, well, you can just level up and put those points into strength. So in that regards, it doesn't really matter what you pick at the beginning, and I'd almost go for making your character just look the way you want. The same goes for the resistance. You can change your character to be more resistant to, say, heat, cold, radiation, or biohazard, but again, this didn't really matter, because again, as you're leveling up and you're finding your way around the world, you're earning points that you can then put into upgrading that resistance, or different armor pieces have different resistant values to them. I found myself at the end of the game with 5 different outfits, each one being 100% resistant to heat, cold, radiation, biohazard, so it doesn't really matter what you pick at the beginning of the game, except for your class. Picking your class basically dictates how you want to play this game and gives you a set of different perks that you can then upgrade and unlock when you're playing through the game. So if you know you want to play weaponry, pick one of those classes. If you're maybe wanting to go for a mage kind of character and use all the different abilities, pick that now because you won't be able to go back and change that. With that being said though, it doesn't close you off from trying out other things. Yes, I picked the Deadeye, which is focusing on weaponry and range combat, but I was using a lot of melee focused combat as well and wasn't having a problem with that at all. One of the cool things about this game in terms of the combat is there is a combo system here. Inputting different button sequences in certain orders allows you to trigger different moves, and if you're able to chain 3 different combos together, you're able to activate your Super Wong Fu, which gives you a few different options like the Turtle Strike, the Ground Slam, the Rapid Shot, or even the Clonk Bonk, which does extreme damage. On top of that, you then have more mutations that you can upgrade and unlock as you play through the game. Things like being able to bring ice out of the ground, being able to blink towards enemies, being able to spawn a mushroom so you can jump up higher, maybe get the jump on some enemies. There are a ton of abilities and a ton of customization in terms of how you want to play this game that I never felt bored or got stale with the combat. And it's not like you have to pick one and stick with it. You could be playing full range weaponry and then halfway through the game you could say, you know what, I actually want to play more melee focused, or I want to focus on my abilities a little bit more and start putting your upgrade points into something like intellect, meaning you have more key energy to then use more abilities. Now when it comes to the actual combat of this game, at first I was having a little bit of trouble. It didn't feel smooth or fluid, and I think the main reason for that is I just wasn't aware of the combo mechanic in this game, and the weapons it gives you at the beginning of the game aren't really that great. When you start to find weapons that you actually enjoy using or crafting weapons, that is when the combat becomes fluid and you start to get into the rhythm of it. And while it doesn't kind of have that same rhythm as say like a Batman Arkham game, it's close, and again, it's super satisfying going into a bunch of enemies, maybe prioritizing some of the small ones, and then taking on the bigger enemy within the group and killing them all and then moving on to the next fight. Sometimes in open world games, I'll get to the point where I just run past enemies because I want to get to somewhere. However, in this game, I always felt like I wanted to take on those enemies because not only was it super fun, but that enemy might drop some cool piece of gear that I can then use to craft a new weapon. There is a ton of loot in this game to explore, and there's checklists on every location you go to, which is super helpful. It'll let you know if you've completed the area or what exactly you're missing. And if you're near something interactable, like a chest, it'll actually highlight it if you get close to it on your UI, so you don't feel like you're just running around aimlessly trying to find that one chest you need. There's a bunch of variety when it comes to rarities in this game. You have things like your common, your uncommon, your rare, all the way up to your ultimate. Now you can just find new weapons and armor in the game whilst you're looting, but you'll also find pieces to make your own weapons, and it's super fun and super rewarding once you've made your own weapon and then you start taking it into battles and you realize, yeah, this thing kicks ass. You'll also find pieces that have perks to them. For instance, you might find an axe here which comes with overpowered. The damage inflicted by this weapon is increased by 2% for every 10 units of strength. You can also go in and modify existing armor. So if you found a piece that you really like to wear, you could modify it, increasing the actual armor stat, or maybe giving you a better percentage at doing critical damage. You can really get into the finer details here and make your character super strong, or you simply don't have to. I went through most of the game without having ever crafted a weapon or even modified my armor, and I didn't feel like I suffered for it, but when I did start to upgrade and craft and modify my stuff, I started to realize that I was kind of missing out on some better weapons than just the stuff I was finding around. Let's briefly talk about enemies. Now this game does a pretty good job when it comes to the variety of enemies and how they attack. You've just got your sort of normal minions. Sometimes you'll have these massive enemies. Sometimes enemies will be covered in armor, and the only way to actually take off their armor is to go in with a melee weapon first, and then you'll be able to use your ranged weaponry. There's also a few different bosses in this game. There are 4 main bosses, and they all have a different sort of mechanic when you're fighting them. However, they did all kind of feel a little bit samey. Along with that though, as you're exploring the world, you will find named bosses. And while none of them seem to be super challenging, it was sort of nice and refreshing. You're just wandering around and then suddenly this named boss pops out of nowhere, and you've got to go ahead and take them on. So let's talk about the world and mission structure. This world is gorgeous. This game looks super good, and the amount of variety in locations is also pretty nice. You have things like sort of the overgrown suburbs, but then you've got sort of the toxic wasteland area where everything's grey and there's black sludge. You have the snowy, icy areas. You have the hot desert where if you're not properly equipped, the heat will kill you. You even have a water section where you need a little boat to get around, otherwise you're just gonna drown. There's a nice variety here, and I never felt bored of being in a location. Also, the map size is pretty big. You as your character walks pretty slow, and yes, you can get a mount, but fast travel is really going to be your friend here. And that comes in super handy when doing some of these missions, because a lot of these missions are go there, talk to someone, go pick up an item for them, and then bring it back to them. Or go somewhere, kill a load of enemies, and then go back to them. But surprisingly, it never felt like I was doing the same thing. I never got bored of the mission structure. And maybe that's just due to the variety of environments in this game. It never felt like I was going to the same place. Or maybe that the combat is fun, so it never felt like a chore when I had to go and fight a load of enemies. Just playing through the main missions, the game will take you through most of the different environments, but there are a few places you'll have to go and explore for yourself to find some of the side quests hidden around. This game definitely doesn't take you to every single corner of the map. Now, a very important thing with games now is accessibility. So let's quickly take a look at all the different options we have in this game. So starting with the actual accessibility menu here, for gameplay we have autocomplete for quick time events, which comes in very handy, especially for someone like me who really suffers with sort of repetitive actions. We then have auto advanced dialogues. This toggles whether the dialogue should auto advance without any player input. In terms of sound, we have subtitles. We then have subtitle size, and that goes from tiny all the way up to large. And the large subtitle size here is pretty decent. In terms of subtitle color, you have white, you have yellow, you have blue, you have green, and then you have red. You also have the subtitle background, which is this black bar. You can turn that on and off, and then you can change the opacity of that bar. When it comes to mapping the controller, you can pretty much map everything to however you want it. There's a bunch of camera and controller options. You can change the field of view, you can change the camera shake, you can turn off depth of field, you can put on smoothing, you can turn off vibration. There is a bunch of languages you can have the text and the speech in this game. You can change your difficulty halfway through, you can scale the HUD up and down, you can turn on quest markers, damage numbers, enemy indicators. There is a decent amount of options here, which is great to see. So what are my thoughts on Biomutant as a whole after going into this game really not having any expectations of what to expect? I am super impressed by this game. It is a ton of fun, and I've still got so much more to do. When I finished the campaign, I'd put in roughly about 18 hours. But my map is still completely covered with side missions to go and do, and if you are someone who is a completionist, this game is going to take you a while because each location has got a ton of stuff to go and find in it, whether that's unique weapons or just loot to be able to then craft better weapons. By the time I've completed all the side missions, I'll probably have put in plus 30 hours, and there is New Game Plus if you want. Now, I don't really like to put a number on my reviews, but what I will say, if you are someone who is looking for that itch of maybe a Breath of the Wild or an Immortals Phoenix Rising or just sort of an open world RPG, this is going to be the game for you, but don't go in expecting a super engaging story. You're playing this game for the gameplay here. Now, that isn't to say that you won't enjoy the story. I'm sure a lot of people will. It just wasn't for me. But did I feel like it hurt the overall experience? Not really, no. If you're looking for a game to get lost in and just put a load of hours into, I highly recommend you play Biomutant. It is the biggest surprise of a game so far for me this year. It is up there as one of my favorite games I've played this year. So yeah, if you're looking for something like that, definitely pick it up. Hopefully you enjoyed this review of Biomutant. If you did, then click that like button, and if you're new around here, consider subscribing because there's going to be a ton of Biomutant videos on the channel over the next week or so. I'm going to have a ton of guides and helpful videos to help you out with this game if you need them, so stay tuned for that. Apart from all of that though, thank you very much for watching and for hanging out with me. Hopefully I'll see you in some future content, but until then, as always, make sure you take care. Bye bye.